I would even use the word intercultural competence, because I think in a globalized world we have to think interculturally and not just cultural competence or social competence, but intercultural competence, is that yes, it's culture, both consuming it or using it and participating in it, is practicing democracy. And I would like to give one example. I'm not sure if I have the slide here or not. Hold on. I should see if I do, because if I don't, I should. Microcosmos or macrocosmos. The great director Peter Brook, who I mentioned earlier, a Brit who worked in France for many years and created really Europe's first multicultural company in the 70s, an international company made up of about 20 actors and dancers who had never, who couldn't even have a common language together. He said he was interested in making culture with this company in the meaning that yogurt is culture, yogurt culture. A bacteria that slowly transforms the milky substance of our society into something thick, rich, and good tasting. By this he means that 12 people or 20 people or some people in an amateur theater group in Angered or whatever who are working out how to communicate with each other and how to sing together. You know, you are the bass and I'm the soprano, and we try to find, don't sing too loud, because if you do then you can't hear me. And we find this way of doing. This is practicing democracy. This is practicing coming to agreement. It's practicing coming to consensus. And that the cultural field has replaced now this consensus that was done in a hierarchical way through, for example, most religious, official religions, that is the church. And to some degree, even culture is starting to take a greater place than, for example, what used to be our class consciousness, that is the workers' movement. We were practicing democracy by the workers sitting down and saying, wait a minute, what conditions do we want? How do we want to live our life? And this transformed into laws and into relationships between a trade union and the owners, for example. Now we're arriving in a need where we have a need to increase our intercultural and our social competence and to listen to one another and to find consensus. And culture is a perfect place for this. So what is our society's economic answer to that? We cut the budget of Kulturskolan throughout Sweden. Instead of every child having a chance to try to sing, play, dance, do theater, instead the talk in schools is about employability. Make sure that when you get out at the age of 16 or 18 years old from school that you can be employed. So we give you skills for employment, but we don't teach you how to think or how to learn new things. Culture, the practicing of culture, the experiencing of culture, is a practicing of democracy, in my opinion. So what needs to be done? In order to respond to these, what is an appropriate cultural response to those four challenges I put at the beginning? Environmental, economic, democratic, and xenophobic challenges that we have. What needs to be done is that we need to cultivate our capacity for empathy. This is not det här är inte flummigt. I don't mean this in a spaced out way. It's not like, can we all love each other, or can we all, of course we must, but that's another question. I'm talking about true empathy, the capacity to really understand from where you are coming as opposed to where I am coming from, and not seeing them as one hierarchical, one place is better than another, but to understand the conditions which have made you. There are three places, only really three areas in our society where empathy is cultivated. One, in the home, parents, and in the neighborhood, the extended families, the neighbors in the trappuppgång. This is one place. It's first as a child that we learn, are we being listened to or are we not being listened to? Can I express myself freely or do I have to hide something? Secondly, it happens in the schools, which is the extension from the family, from the parents. Education and schools is about empathy cultivation. And lastly, it's in culture and the arts. Empathy is not about the job market, because the job market is about competition. Empathy is not in the banking system, because in the banking system you're not looking at how one feels or doesn't feel. You're finding out, is there money moving from here to here? Empathy is created in these three areas, and this is where the basis of it, in my opinion, of all of it. So we need to work in these ways: shared spaces and imagined spaces. This can be museums, it can be culture houses, it can be public space, which is becoming more and more important for those of us working with city planning and urban reinvention. We know that architects are working much more about where are the public spaces when we build a neighborhood. If you look at the old miljonprogrammet, the suburbs from the 60s that were built, they were built to house people, but not to really create very much environment around. Then we arrived at a time when we had beautiful inner city areas. I look at Stockholm, which I think is a beautiful city. However, our open areas, our public spaces, are being rented out to Starbucks, McDonald's, etc. So I don't sit down any longer at a cafe table and spend 2 hours talking with my friend Luca while I drink 1 cup of coffee. After 10 minutes, somebody's asking me, do you want the check? It's time to go. My public space is between these. Somehow. The idea of a place where we gather to share who got married, who's in love, what kids are having trouble, what politics we want. The piazza, as I say from my village in the south of Italy, the piazza has been losing space. We have to put focus on these public spaces as well as our theaters and concert halls. Here I would like to say one thing about spaces. I will take my right here to say large things, as I said before, about the commissioning rather than having a call for artists. In this case, I would say that we have built ourselves, apart from the French king, who separated the stage from the audience, that we built ourselves into a corner. We have a house for theater. We have a house for old art. We have a house for contemporary visual art. We have a house for concerts. We have a house for world music as opposed to jazz music, as opposed to symphony music. And we have separated ourselves into art forms so that we have a house for each one of these. The interplay between them gets lost. And I'm a strong believer in creating shared spaces which are also art form shared. I would love to see graphic art being done, shown, even printed in front of people at the same time as you're on your way to the theater performance. But you drop by 20 minutes before to see some of that. And it's the same place as the library. And it's the same places where the discussion about the environmental or cultural impact of a decision to be made. That is, they are meeting places. They are shared spaces, not art form defined. Because that's been part of the exclusivity. Those who like theater go to the theater. They never go to jazz. To get these cross-fertilization between the art forms is going to be an essential step in the future. Shared space is essential for dialogue, and our personal histories are different, but our playing field is common. There are many essential spaces shared throughout the world: the school, the workplace, the sports arena, media networks, the town square, and other gathering places. Cultural space, like theaters, concert houses, museums, and heritage sites, are among the most important, but we have to make them multifunctional in the long run. These are the kinds of things that Europe can take up because it's not bound by the national cultural tradition that our national member states are. That's why Europe is a way from the local through Europe and back down to change our society. The other thing I would like to underline, and which we will talk about later and go into groups, but this is about co-creation. There is a strong tendency in the arts away from presentation and towards participation. Co-creation. When you talk about having a relationship with your audience, you don't talk about how I can sell more tickets. You talk about how can I develop relations with my audience so that they want to come back. and carry on and follow our research together with us, rather than just buying a ticket. Even we know that the business world is working in this way, that businesses are working more and more towards ongoing, sustained relations with someone, rather than short-term, how many tubes of toothpaste can I sell this month? And I think that participation, and as I said before also, it's connected to democratic development. So amateurs and professionals, our audience councils, engaging the audiences in the process and the decision about repertory. The idea that we hire an artistic director for our theater and then he or she decides the repertory and then they sell it back to us is absurd. This person needs to be in constant dialogue with his or her own community to find out what will be relevant for them. So I think that this question of co-creation and participation, and this is very connected to the Creative Europe program that we started with, talking about from Europe, because they have put an emphasis on this question of co-creation and development of audience relations. One more thing that I really want to underline, and that is that I believe very, very strongly that we live in a world which is more and more, we call it globalized. I would hope that it's not globalized, because it sounds like Walt Disney to me. Everybody's looking at the same films and everybody's speaking English. It sounds kind of boring. However, I believe that international impulses, that is development of international and intercultural competence, is an essential aspect of our place. And that we cannot focus only on our local culture, but we have to connect our local culture to international tendencies. So that, yes, we can do a deep study of one farmer in our Västerbotten. If I'm working with Västerbottens Teater and I want to do deep research with old people and they tell me their stories, but if I just show it without comparing it to international impulses, then we're not really learning anything. It's nostalgia. And nostalgia is not what cultural heritage is about. Cultural heritage is about constantly challenging our heritage, constantly challenging our impressions by something coming from the outside. So that international impulses, guest visiting expeditions and guest performances, of course, but above all, co-productions and commissioning across local and national barriers. Meaning that if you've got some artists who are working with pottery in some small town in Västergötland, then what you want to do is not to just that they work out pottery from a local level and show it, because then it becomes, again, nostalgia, but to connect it to some people who are working with new forms of ceramics in another place and bring them in so that they work on something together. Not we show an international exhibition and then we show a local exhibition, but you get the local people, including even some amateurs, to work together with highly interesting international artists and create co-production. Co-production, co-creation, collaboration. So can arts contribute to the shared space? I think so. This is my strong opinion that it can. And that not only that it can, but it's probably the best tool we have in our hands. But I want to go back, and then I open for discussion, to what Luca pointed out and what I started to say at the beginning. The idea, how do we define this word culture? Now, I don't want to go into a cultural anthropological discussion, but when I use the word culture, and I believe that when Luca will be using it later on, and in the name Culture Action Europe, which is our network, the word culture is much broader than the arts. The arts is a subset of culture. In fact, if we want to make it very simple, there is nature and there is culture. Nature is those conditions we are born with, genetically, environmentally, agriculturally. This is the nature, the things that cannot be changed, of which we learn to adapt, or sometimes we can adapt them. Culture is everything else that we do together. We buy things from each other, we make love, we get married, we have kids, we open schools, we pray together, we do sports together. All of this is culture. So the cultural, the expression that I'm talking now is culture in a much broader way. And I think that the cross-fertilization between the different parts of culture are very important. So for example, culture and schools, culture and the environment, culture and history, culture and democracy, culture and integration. All of these, the culture plus the cross-sectoral is what we will be going into in the afternoon. My dream is that we will create a Europe which is not the sum of 28 member states, but actually create a Europe which is bigger than any one of these 28 states. And I don't mean in terms of power. I don't want to get into this silly discussion that Brussels is taking power away from us in Sweden. If Brussels says that we have to clean up our air, and there are some member states in Europe that would rather spend their money on something else than cleaning up the air, I think that probably it's perfectly right that Europe says, wait a minute, hello, I'm breathing your air. You know, we are breathing Polish air. We are drinking our water of our Östersjö, of our Baltic Sea, is not decided only by us, but by a number of countries around the Baltic Sea, so that we have to work internationally. But I believe that Europe can be a driving force for a progressive future, but in order to do that, we have to make sure that we don't run Europe the way we run our member states. And that's why I'm a little bit concerned about the European elections that are coming up now, because more and more our European Parliament, which has more power, as we talked about before, starts to feel it has more influence, is going to start reflecting exactly what is happening at our nation state level. And then we lost the specialness of Europe. So I refer, and I go back to the very first slide I had, Europe as a cultural project. That's the project that we should be exploring. And the projects that you come up with that are European projects, and there are many, many hundreds of them throughout Europe, and including the ones that some of you will be involved in, these are the projects that will define Europe as a cultural project in the future. You are part of defining that by what you do and by what we do. This is more or less what I wanted to say from a larger perspective on the European project. There's much more to say, but I would like to leave open to questions. I know that Luca may want to respond, and Annika, but also any of you. Questions and or comments and or battles. Does Europe have a future? I think that's the big question. Does it have a cultural future?